This recipe comes from Mrs. John Scobell's cookbook and was used at Reynolds Lodging. The document dates back to 1803 England. While much of the cookbook contains ordinary recipes for preserving various foods, there are a few unique pieces such as to make fireballs and for those who are weak and thirsty. The page first contains a short set of instructions titled "To pickle red cabbage another way." It makes sense to have so many recipes for preserving food considering the context. This was the early 1800s, a time before modern refrigerators. Food had to be preserved in jars with salt, anything that made it last more than a week. If you continue down the page, you will find a recipe for a trifle. Because of the Napoleonic Wars happening at this time, Great Britain was unable to import much grain from the rest of Europe. Railroads also had not become widespread in England at this point. Because of these factors, some grains were almost a delicacy, and what there was used to make simple items such as plain bread to make sure people were being fed. If a person could afford to spend their time and money making trifles, they probably weren't from the working class, indicating Reynolds Lodge was a classy establishment within the higher ranks. For comparison, I looked at a recipe for gelatin sponge pudding. Handwritten by Alec Knorr in the United States, the document dates back to the 1930s. While the instructions for the 1803 recipe are written in complete sentences with absolutely no brief lists, this newer recipe keeps things about as simple and brief as possible. I also noticed how one of the required ingredients for the gelatin sponge pudding is a box of gelatin. This recipe definitely came from the 20th century, full of consumerism and supermarkets on every corner with boxed and canned goods. In 1803 England, finding a mass-produced box of gelatin would have been impossible. Sometimes, it's crazy to imagine the process necessary for making and preserving food. Looking back at old cookbooks can give us a glimpse into what food was like in history.